The last thing Devereaux Holt wrote in his field journal, before it was found 17 miles from where his tent had been staked, spine cracked and open to a blank page, was not a cry for help. It was a question. 4 words, pressed so hard into the paper that the pen tore through on the final letter. Why does it wait? That detail was never released to the public. The ranger who found the journal, a woman named Thessaly Vorn, kept a photocopy folded in her breast pocket for the next 11 years. Not because she was sentimental, because she wanted to remember what a person sounds like when they understand something that should not be understood. What follows are 3 accounts. They are not legends. They are not folklore passed around campfires to frighten the credulous. They are documented cases, partial documents in some instances, because documentation has a way of becoming incomplete in the places where these events occurred. The Appalachian Highlands in western North Carolina, the backcountry of Olympic National Park in Washington State, a stretch of trail in Denali National Park, Alaska, that does not appear on any map printed after 2003. The names of the missing have been kept intact. The names of the witnesses have been changed at their request, or at the request of their families, or because they asked once and then never spoke of it again. The accounts begin normally. They always begin normally. That is the most important thing to understand before you read further. Not one of these people was careless. Not one of them went into the wilderness unprepared. Devereaux Holt had been a backcountry guide for 19 years. Maren Ilse had a doctorate in environmental biology and had published 2 papers on the behavioral ecology of ungulates in high-altitude ecosystems. Calder son was 26 years old and had hiked the Denali backcountry 4 times before the 5th time, in July of 2009, when he did not come back. None of them were reckless. That is what their families have always said, and they are right to say it. But recklessness has nothing to do with it. Devereaux Holt disappeared on October 14, 2001, in the Pisgah National Forest near the town of Hot Springs, North Carolina. He was 43 years old. He was guiding a group of 6 hikers along a section of the Appalachian Trail, the stretch between the Jerry Cabin Shelter and the Spring Mountain Shelter, a route he had walked more than 200 times across his career. He knew which routes were slick after rain. He knew which switchbacks had eroded over the summer and needed a wider berth. He knew that the section near the Walnut Mountain ridgeline sometimes got ice in October, and he had reminded his group to watch their footing after the temperature dropped on the 2nd day. The group had no reason to watch him. The 5 surviving members of the party gave statements to the Madison County Sheriff's Office within 48 hours of their return. Their statements were consistent in almost every detail. On the evening of October 13th, Devereaux had seemed entirely himself, organized, relaxed, competent in the way that people are competent when they have done something so long that competence becomes indistinguishable from personality. He had cooked the group's dinner over a camp stove. He had told a story about a previous trip, a client who had panicked at a stream crossing and refused to budge for 2 hours. He had laughed. He had washed the cookware. He had said goodnight. In the morning, his sleeping bag was inside his tent. His boots were at the tent entrance. His headlamp, his bear canister, his field journal, all present. His wool socks were hung over a cord he had tied between 2 birch trees the night before. They were dry. He was not there. The hikers waited. 2 of them called his name into the trees for 20 minutes. The forest was quiet in the particular way that October forests are quiet. Not empty exactly, but withdrawn. Sound seemed to go somewhere and not return. One of the hikers, a man named Tomas Egri, who had worked as a sound engineer in Atlanta and had spent considerable time in recording studios thinking carefully about the behavior of sound, would say later that the silence felt less like an absence and more like a presence. The sound went in, he told the investigator, like the trees were breathing in and not breathing out. The search began immediately upon the group's return to the trailhead. It lasted 11 days and covered 47 square miles of terrain. 52 search and rescue volunteers, 8 dogs, 1 helicopter from the Asheville Regional Office. They found the field journal on the 6th day, 17 miles southwest of the campsite, near a creek drainage that had no name on the USGS maps. They found 1 boot on the 9th day, in a completely different direction, northeast, upslope, on a rocky section of ridge where the soil was too thin to hold a footprint. Thessaly Vorn, the ranger who led the search, had been working in the Pisgah district for 11 years at the time. She was precise, methodical, and not given to speculation. In the debrief report she filed with the Forest Service, her language was careful and unemotional. There was one exception. In a paragraph describing the area around the creek drainage where the journal was found, she wrote, "Ground vegetation was undisturbed, no indication of passage through the underbrush in any direction from the recovery site. The journal appeared to have been placed there, not dropped." She underlined the word, placed. There was no protocol for that word in a search and rescue report. She used it anyway. Devereaux Holt has never been found. The case of Maren Ilse is different in its texture. Where the Holt disappearance is characterized by absence, nothing disturbed, no trail, no trace. The Ilse case has an excess of detail. Too much was recorded. Too much was observed. And the problem, the genuine and persistent problem that kept the case file open at Olympic National Park for 6 years after the standard closure period, is that several of the observed details should not have been possible. Maren Ilse was 38 years old in August of 2005 when she arrived at the Hoh Rainforest Visitor Center in Washington State and signed in for a solo backpacking trip into the Hoh River corridor. She had her permit. She had her itinerary, filed with the permit office in duplicate. She was known to the rangers at that station. She had conducted field research in the Hoh corridor 3 times in the previous 4 years, and the staff recognized her. She signed in at 8:47 in the morning. The weather that week was clear and mild for the Coast Range. Temperatures in the high 50s, low chance of precipitation, good visibility. August in the Hoh is as close to reliable as weather in that corridor ever gets. Her itinerary called for 4 nights. She had enough food and fuel for 6. She was returning to a site she had used before, a flat bench above the river approximately 9 miles in, where she had spent 2 previous research seasons, documenting the foraging patterns of Roosevelt elk. She had notes from those earlier seasons, detailed behavioral maps, and a familiarity with the terrain that the park's own wildlife biologist considered expert. On the 3rd day of her trip, August 19th, 2005, she began transmitting. The radio she carried was a backcountry unit, standard issue for solo researchers operating in the park. She had used it on her previous trips without incident, mostly to check in at scheduled times and report routine observations. On August 19th, she began transmitting at 6:14 in the morning, which was 46 minutes before her scheduled check-in time. The ranger who received the transmission was a second-year seasonal employee named Garrett, who has since left the Park Service and does not speak publicly about what he heard. What he told his supervisor immediately afterward, and later repeated in a written statement, was this. The transmission began with approximately 3 minutes of ambient sound, wind, water, the occasional creak of the old-growth canopy, followed by Maren Ilse's voice, clear and steady, describing what she was hearing. She was not describing it in the tone of someone frightened. She was describing it in the tone of someone taking notes. Vocalization at roughly 9 o'clock from my position, she said. Consistent pattern, interval of approximately 6 seconds between repetitions. It does not match any catalog entry I know. It is not a bird. The interval is too regular. Animals don't keep that interval. Machinery doesn't either, not out here. A pause. The wind. Then, it sounds like it's listening to itself, like it's keeping time. There was a gap of about 40 seconds. Then she said, "It stopped when I started talking." There was another gap, then quieter. "It started again when I stopped." She remained on the line for another 11 minutes without speaking. The ambient sound continued. At one point, Garrett said, he could hear something that he described as a pattern of taps or impacts, rhythmic, like knuckles on wood but slower and wetter. Maren did not describe this sound. She may not have been near her radio at that point. At 6:41, she said, in a completely normal voice, "I'm going to move my camp this morning. I'll check in at the scheduled time." She checked in at the scheduled time. She reported nothing unusual. She said she had relocated approximately 200 meters upslope and was setting up in a new position. She did not check in the following morning. The search located her camp on the second day. Everything was organized. Her notes from 3 seasons of research were stacked and rubber-banded and placed on top of her pack, which was fully loaded, as if ready to carry out. Her food was still in the bear canister, which was closed and properly secured to a cable between 2 trees. Her sleeping bag was rolled tight. Her radio was in its case. The radio's log showed 1 additional transmission that had not been received at the station. A technical anomaly, according to the technician who examined the unit. The kind of fault that could have been caused by interference or a brief power fluctuation. The log showed that the transmission had lasted 4 minutes and 22 seconds, beginning at 4:03 in the morning on August 20th. No content had been recorded, only the duration. 4 minutes and 22 seconds in the dark, before anyone at the station was awake to receive it. The camp was at the edge of a grove of western red cedar. The trees in that section of the Hoh are old enough to have their own weather. The canopy is so dense that rain rarely reaches the ground, and the air beneath it sits in a different temperature, smelling of moss and iron-rich soil and the particular sweetness of wet bark. Ranger Thessaly Vorn, who had transferred from the Pisgah district to Olympic in 2003, a fact that she has said repeatedly as a coincidence, and that she continues, visibly, to struggle to believe, examined the site with the search team. She noted, in her report, that the vegetation immediately surrounding the camp was undisturbed. She noted that the soil around the perimeter showed no footprints leading away. She used the word placed again, in the same context. Equipment appeared to have been placed. Maren Ilse has never been found. Calder Son was 26. This is repeated not to invoke sentiment about youth, but because his age is relevant to one specific detail. He had recently completed a Wilderness First Responder certification, an intensive 9-day course conducted in March of 2009 through the National Outdoor Leadership School, and part of that training included a unit on wilderness psychology, on the cognitive distortions that occur under conditions of extreme stress or environmental disorientation. He was not someone who would have easily confused what he saw with what was there. He had studied the difference. He had been trained, quite deliberately, to hold that line. He disappeared on July 6, 2009. He was hiking the Muldrow Glacier approach to Denali's north face, not attempting a summit, just moving through the backcountry as he had done 4 times before, navigating by the landmarks he had memorized from previous trips and from the topographic maps he carried in his hip belt. He was alone, which was his preference, and which the park's backcountry permit system allows under specific conditions that he met. He had registered his itinerary. He was expected back at the Kantishna Ranger Station on July 11th. He did not return on July 11th. The note he left, not in a journal, but on a folded piece of paper tucked into the top pocket of his pack, which was found sitting upright against a boulder approximately 4 miles from his last confirmed camp, was not addressed to anyone. It read, "I think I understand now that it is not trying to follow me. I think it has always been ahead." The paper was folded in thirds, the way you fold a letter for an envelope. The pack was fully loaded. His tent was still in it. His sleeping bag was still in it. His crampons were strapped to the outside, properly, the way you attach crampons when you're moving on firm snow and might need them quickly. The ranger who found the pack, not Thessaly Vorn this time, a different ranger entirely, a man named Oksanen, who had worked the Denali backcountry for 7 years, noted in his report that the pack had been positioned with its back panel facing outward, as if it had been set down by someone who intended to pick it up again, or as if it had been placed there by someone who wanted it to be found facing the right direction, as if whoever had left it knew which direction searchers would approach from. There is no rational explanation for that. The note does not contain enough information to derive it. Calder Son could not have known which direction searchers would approach from, because the direction would have depended on weather, on the availability of air support, on the deployment schedule of the ground teams. There are at least 3 plausible approach routes from Kantishna. The pack was facing the one that was actually used. Oksanen sat with that detail for a long time before writing it down. He wrote it down anyway. Calder Son has never been found. Thessaly Vorn retired from the National Park Service in August of 2014, after 24 years of service across 5 districts. She was given a commendation for her work in wilderness search and rescue. The commendation mentioned specifically her meticulous documentation, and her composure under conditions of uncertainty. At her retirement gathering, held at a picnic shelter at the Hoh Rainforest Visitor Center, which was either a meaningful choice or a coincidence, depending on whom you ask, she gave a short speech. She thanked her colleagues. She talked about the landscape. She said that the wilderness teaches you, if you let it, the difference between things that are unknown and things that are unknowable, and that the most important professional skill she had developed over her career was the ability to sit with the second category without trying to make it into the first. No one asked what she meant by that. No one asked her about the photocopy she still carried in her breast pocket. No one asked about the 2 words she had used in reports 23 years apart, in forests on opposite sides of the continent, describing objects that had been arranged, positioned, oriented, prepared, in the absence of any person who could have arranged them. She drove home along Route 101, north along the coast, the Pacific gray and wide to her left. She has not spoken publicly about any of the 3 cases described above. She has not confirmed or denied that she considers them connected. When a journalist from a Pacific Northwest outdoor publication contacted her in 2016 to ask about the Ilsa case, she replied by email briefly. There are things that happened in those places that I recorded accurately and completely. I have nothing to add to what I wrote down. The journalist followed up. She did not reply. There is a photograph from that last evening. Tomas Egri, the sound engineer, took it. Most people see a stump or a shadow at the tree line. Some see a figure. Egri has never said what he sees. When pressed, he says only, "I don't think it would help you to know." They are only felt, sometimes, at the edge of a trail, in the last light, when the trees stop moving and the sound goes somewhere it doesn't return from. And you realize, not with fear, but with something older, that you have been heard. If this reached something you can't put down, the channel needs you. Subscribe and leave the light on.